The Journey of an Apprentice Pilgrim, Series Divine Footsteps. Book 2, written by Felipe Chavarro Polania, narrated by Louise Robinson, Brian Wilson, Christine Stevens, Otoniel Lewis, Marcus Burton, Luke Harris, Martin Payne, Michael Owen, Maxie Holmes. Kadmiel discovers the fifth inscription. Almost 2 weeks had passed since Malka's caravan had returned to the city of Sagnit, when Kadmiel, sleeping on his cot after a night as a flock guard, was awakened by Atzel to present himself to Malka. He immediately presented himself at Malka's main hut and was struck by the exquisiteness of the materials with which it had been built. It was immense and seemed to him rather like a great pavilion. Its main material was cedar wood, and he could see all around him sculptures and vessels made of costly stones. After a long time of waiting, Malka came out to meet him and sat down opposite the young man, staring at him as if waiting for the young man to start talking. Then Malka beckoned him closer, seeing that the young man was puzzled as if he had been rendered speechless. Finally, after a short wait, the young man regained his confidence and carefully sat down opposite Malka, waiting for the woman to speak to him.
My son, I have been informed by Eleazar of your visit to Amitai, and also of what has happened in the camp while I was on my journey to the distant lands of Egypt. Do you still wish to be an apprentice and thus fulfill your vocation? Or perhaps you have already given up on that idea?
Yes, ma'am. My strength has waned and I have often fallen into depression, boredom, and apathy.
The woman nodded and said,
So be it then. I had intended to spend much more time with you, but as you see, your double mind has other plans for you.
The young man interrupted, saying,
My double mind?
That is so, for you are still fickle, and though I am a woman capable of leading great caravans and expeditions, I cannot convince one whose double mind has given up his dream without trying hard enough. To make matters worse, you have forgotten that in the desert, men perish for disobedience. In spite of this, you were able to overcome the difficulty, even when your life depended on it. I believe that your problem is that of all men, who, forgetting God's provision and their former victories, give up when the next obstacle in their lives presents itself, not understanding how close they are to reaching the next summit.
The young man interrupted and said,
But how shall I triumph over this evil that afflicts me?
You will have to become master of your emotions, and I know of no better way than to give yourself to the process required to form your character. Only then can you attain your true nature.
A stiff wind rattled the roof of the hut where they stood, and Kadmiel was speechless, not understanding what the woman meant. Finally, the woman went on to say,
I have been informed of your quarrels and feuds with some of the servants in this camp, and from this I know that your stay in this place has been tortuous. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am. Recently my patience reached its limit and I contended with Yitzhak and Kinor, for they kept insulting me and mocking me, calling me a dreamer and a drunkard.
The woman stared at him and said,
Atzel trusted you to be his right-hand man anyway. However, since you are not the master of your emotions, you allowed those who needed to be directed by you to guide you. You have failed in your work, for you did not know how to use your emotions, let alone those of others. Along the way, you will often be put in front of difficult people to examine yourself. Remember, envy is a negative emotion born of a heart full of frustration, which cannot be persuaded of its poor performance, for it knows that it can give more. As a learner, you must understand that we are all created with great capabilities. However, at some point in our lives, whether out of fear, doubt, or ingratitude, we try to persuade ourselves that we do not have what it takes to achieve our goals. This conflict will never end until we get back on the path that leads to our dreams. Before quarreling with them, you had to inquire about their real frustrations. Children and dreamers are often looked down upon, for they threaten us with their presence, reminding us that there are no limits for the likes of them. Envy will age the heart of man, and when you are faced with it, just remember that it is a compliment that whoever stopped dreaming, it yields you if you live persuaded that your dreams are a reality. Live in gratitude for your dreams, for just having them is a sign that God has chosen you for something beyond your limits. So lift up your eyes and look. Pay attention to your surroundings, and when you see someone with envy, remember the cries of a child behind the bars of fear and doubt. If you as an apprentice heed his cry and discover the dream he has renounced, you can set him free, restoring freedom to a child of God who has renounced his true nature, forgetting his true essence, the soul of a child.
The young man was silent, dejected by his misbehavior. Then, after a long pause, he said,
How can I ever address them again? Will they stop hating me overnight?
Learn to control yourself and communicate your message without language or words, so that your voice will not be heard. If you focus on nurturing your vocation as an apprentice and put it at the service of others, sooner or later, when they see your example, they will follow you and you will help them fulfill their dreams. Isn't this the soul of your vocation? To learn and then share what you have learned? The best way to teach will always be by example. That is why in my homeland it is said that the true sage teaches without saying a word. Wisdom is illustrative ability, and it can only be carried out by example. Stand in integrity, for it is the only tribute you pay for your dreams to the Most High. Only then will you become the tree you saw in your dreams, and those who need you will come to you. Do not intoxicate yourself with wine or cider, but with the passion of the one who in the distance calls you, your vocation. Now, do you still wish to be a true apprentice?
Yes, ma'am.
In that case, I suppose you require the interpretation of the inscriptions and the papyrus, as well as fulfilling your grandfather's design and then sharing it with the world. Am I right?
That's right.
Very good. How quickly you have recovered your enthusiasm. To begin with, I will ask you a simple condition. In return, I will listen attentively to your matter. And, if it is in my power to interpret the inscriptions you need and the papyrus you require, I will gladly do so. On the other hand, if I cannot fully interpret what you are looking for, then I promise that I will do everything in my power to help you achieve your goal. And if I cannot fully interpret what you are looking for, then I promise that I will do everything in my power to help you achieve your goal. As you can see, I am a woman of great wealth, and thanks to my constant travels, I have met men and women from distant lands. Surely some of them will be able to help us. By the way, I have also recently seen the face of Zur, whom you are patiently waiting for on one of my expeditions. Perhaps if necessary, I will also refer this matter by letter, so that your waiting will not be so burdensome. Do you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
My condition then is that you work in this field until you can fully replace Atzel in his duties. In addition, I want you to exercise true control over your emotions.
The young man interrupted again, saying,
Control of my emotions. How will I achieve this with Yitzhak and Kino attacking me?
The woman smiled and said,
Your mission is to convert them to you so that you can persuade them of their dreams. Do you accept the challenge?
The young man was silent for a moment and said,
Roger that.
Then the woman nodded slightly and said,
In that case, it is time to tell me all your dreams and show me the leather tube with its inscriptions. You must not omit any detail.
The young man took a deep breath of air and began.
Many years ago, my grandfather
Told her all about his grandfather and the chest he had given him. He also told her about his stay with Asal and his uncle Raphael in the oil fields. He then went on to tell her about his journey through the desert of Bethzalel, and how, upon entering an abandoned camp, he found the leather tube with the 7 inscriptions. He also told her how, after finding the skin tube with the papyrus inside, he had 2 dreams. Malka listened willingly to all that the young man told her. Finally, Kadmiel opened his shepherd's bag and took out the skin tube and handed it to Malka. Suddenly, the woman distinguishing several inscriptions said to him,
Good news, my son. I have distinguished several inscriptions. The first is a new nature written in the language of my husband Eliyahu. Then I can see the following inscriptions written in Arabic, Latin, and Greek saying, Wisdom of the living God, the great exchange, and the angular stone. I suppose these inscriptions are nothing new to you, since you have consulted Eleazar and Amitai recently.
The young man nodded his head slightly. Then the woman continued.
Today, however, my eyes see an inscription that reminds me of the time when I was raised on my father's knee in Egypt. At that time, our parents, being natives of Egypt, taught us the Demotic Egyptian language used in the Nile Delta. Inside the inscription, you can clearly distinguish the symbols that say, God's promise, or in my native language, Ra's promise.
Then the woman opened the leather tube and carefully took the papyrus and began to scrutinize it. Suddenly, tears came to the woman's eyes and she said,
This papyrus reminds me of my beautiful nation, which today is only a shadow of its great splendor. We were defeated by many nations, and of our past glory, only our pyramids are left standing. While the king's flower has been used to carry this message, the language used to write within it is a language unknown to me.
A sixth flash of wisdom. Kadmiel was surprised by the impact the papyrus had had on Malka, and while the woman struggled to recover from the great shock of her memories, the young man felt that the conversation had given him much encouragement to go on. Suddenly Malka stopped sobbing, and after smiling faintly she went on.
Many years ago, when I was but a child in the land of Egypt and my parents were not very wealthy, I had the privilege of learning at my father's knee all that was necessary to be a queen in ancient Egypt. For my father was a descendant of Egyptian nobility, and his ancestors had been in charge of training and preparing women to be queens. In his teachings, I remember very much when he said to me, "My daughter, always remember ancient Egypt with admiration, for there is no people or language that dares to challenge their great wisdom. For regardless of their limitations and the inclement weather, our ancestors were able to build the pyramids, an entire ancient civilization willing to undertake the impossible and to challenge the limits of what had been seen. And do you know why, my dear daughter?" To which I replied, "I don't know, my father." Then my father lifted me up in his arms and said to me, "Everyone who has a dream, which is only a promise from the Most High, will challenge its limits." Then, looking into his eyes, I said to him, "A promise?" And with a look that showed all his love, he said to me, "Yes, my dear princess, a promise will lead you to build your own pyramids as a symbol of your faith. Then people and nations will see and know the objects that bear witness to your feelings and desires. All this is possible if you discover a promise of God and remain in it." That day changed my whole existence because I understood that in order to succeed, I must have my faith in a promise, a persistent dream within me. Today, thanks to the inscription written in the language of my homeland, I have remembered the importance of God's promise in my life. If you meditate on the ancient Egyptian civilization and study its secrets, you will realize that Egypt was and will be a civilization that will always be remembered. And everyone who will look at its pyramids will learn the power that exists in dreams and in an unwavering faith in God's promise.
The boy was astonished, and after a brief pause he said to Malka,
I still don't understand.
I will explain it to you. I was educated in the Egyptian culture, and by knowing it closely, I was able to understand that the pharaohs built their pyramids because they believed in the purpose of their existence and in the transcendence that they had. They believed in life after death. Their whole life was a preparation to meet their father, whom they called Ra. They also buried themselves with what they considered to be their most important writings. These writings were a list of instructions for navigating the afterlife. I believe this is what your mentors have recognized as one of the 3 sources of wisdom. Do you agree?
That's right. One source is written wisdom, whether on papyrus, parchment, or book. The next comes from uncomfortable experiences, and the last source comes from the wisdom of a mentor.
Then the woman looked at him and said,
Now I believe that on the 3 sources of wisdom that you have been taught, there is a foundation of great importance, which we could call, according to the inscriptions, the cornerstone.
The cornerstone,
interrupted the young man.
That's right, the foundation stone. It will be the first stone you will use in the construction of your dreams. Thanks to it, all the other stones or foundations that you use will be established by taking it as a reference. This very stone will determine the position of the whole structure you are to build. Your character. What is the use of accumulating knowledge from these 3 sources if you do not have with you the promise of God? It will not only give direction to your life so that these 3 sources will nourish you to reach your calling, but it will enable you to endure the toil of time, the silence during emotional deserts, and the rush of waters that threaten to destroy what you have built for years. Finally, it will be the source of a permanent and unchanging motivation to continue your training. Remember what I told you about double-mindedness?
Yes, ma'am. It was the main reason for my decline.
Indeed, even if you have the 3 fountains of wisdom at your disposal, double-mindedness will be an almost insurmountable foe. However, the promise of God is the antidote to defeat it. Double-mindedness is also like a powerful poison that penetrates and defiles your heart and character. Yet, if you use the promise of God as the medicine to counteract it, the effects of its powerful poison on your character will vanish.
For a few moments, the young man was organizing his thoughts, and after that brief lapse of time, he asked, saying,
What is the promise of God upon which you have built your pyramid? Forgive my indiscretion in asking you.
The woman, with an expression that betrayed the great sympathy she felt, and with an almost childish smile, replied,
Long ago, when I had grown up and become a maiden, my father came to me and said, My daughter, for millennia our ancestors believed in different gods. One day, however, our people came to know the true God through the testimony of a wise and prudent man. This man was not an Egyptian, and his name was Joseph. Because of his wisdom, Pharaoh and the people of Egypt were warned of 7 years of famine that would consume the entire land around them. This same man Pharaoh set over his house, and by his word all the people of Egypt were ruled. Nevertheless, though our prosperity was great, and our nation became great because of this man and his God, yet a new king arose over Egypt, who made no remembrance of it. And it came to pass that our people oppressed the descendants of Joseph and his brothers, until a man named Moshe arose from among them. This man knew the God of Joseph, and by his hand, the same God who kept us from extinction, humbled us by sinking our chariots and the whole army of our king in the sea. Because of this, many of our people believed this God and converted to him. Since then, from generation to generation, our family sought him, and because of this our fathers managed to treasure a scroll, which has been handed down from time to time until this day. Before I entrust it to you, I will explain it to you as it was revealed to me by my parents, for however short it is, its words have been light in the midst of darkness. And he read it to me continuously until its words remained in my memory. The scroll read thus: Listen to me, all you inhabitants of distant lands. The Lord called me before my birth. From my mother's womb he called me by name. God made my words like sharp swords. He has hidden me in the shadow of his hand. I am like a sharp arrow in his quiver. He said to me, You are my servant, O people of Israel, and I am very proud of you. I replied, But I said to myself, All that I do is in vain. I have run out of strength, and I have accomplished nothing. But what I do I owe to the power of God, and he will give me my reward. It was the Lord who formed me from my mother's womb to serve him. It was he who commissioned me to restore his people Israel for him, and he who has given me strength to do this work and honored me for doing it. The Lord said to me, I have called you to do a greater work than that of restoring Israel, and to bring back the survivors of my people, and I will make you a light to the nations of the world, that you may bring my salvation to them also. The Lord, the Redeemer and Holy One of Israel, says to him who is despised, rejected of mankind, and who lies under the plant of the rulers of the world. Kings will stand in reverence when you pass by. Princes will bow down to you in deep reverence, because the Lord has chosen you and will fulfill what he promises. That day I received God's promise, and no matter what difficulties I had to experience during my life, just by remembering it and repeating it constantly, I reaffirmed my importance in this world. Would you like to know the meaning of this beautiful promise?
The young man opened his mouth but could not say anything, nor did he need to, for his interest could be seen through his face.
Hearing is precious to the hearer. Therefore, listen carefully, my son, for every man is able to rejuvenate himself when a promise of God replaces his regrets and excuses. Remember, therefore, that though you feel ready, God will hide you for a time for your own good. Thus, under the shadow of his hand, time, training, and failures will do their precious work. What would have become of you in the wilderness if God had not taught you by the hand of Asahel and your uncle the importance of listening to the experience of your mentors before you set out on a new journey?
I would have perished.
Likewise, your time to leave this field has not yet come, for you have not yet learned to control your emotions. If you allow God to fully form and prepare you to exercise your vocation, you will surely triumph over your emotions. You will attain a new nature.
Kadmiel's interest grew with each moment that the woman went deeper into her teaching, and after a brief silence the woman continued.
And in due time you will be able to say, I am as a sharp arrow. Yet even when you are ready according to your own opinion, the Most High will have you in his quiver, reserved, so that at the right moment he will use you to launch you and fulfill your purpose in life. You will hit the mark. Is it not your Maker who knows well the work for which you have been called? Bear in mind that during the process in which you are under the shadow of his hand, or while you are in his quiver, you may say many times, All that I do is in vain. I have run out of strength, and I have accomplished nothing.
That's right.
That is why you must be trained for a time. In this way, your character will attain the edge that the Most High needs to achieve his purpose. God is not a man to err, nor is he dependent upon time to be carried away by your haste. Always remember God's promise when you are under the shadow of his hand, enduring the work of time, failure, and training upon your soul.
What would be the promise I must remember?
Asked the young man, eager to know the woman's answer.
The promise you must remember is simple. Your Maker has chosen you and will keep what he promises.
At that moment, Atzel slowly opened the door to the room, and raising his hand as a sign that he was about to speak, he interrupted.
Forgive me for interrupting you, my lady, but I have finished my work, and as I was ordered to do, I have returned to accompany you.
The woman blinked and replied,
Go ahead, Atzel. I take this opportunity to acknowledge your good work as Kadmiel's mentor. I have seen how well you have mastered our language.
Thank you, my lady.
Atzel replied. Then he sat down next to Kadmiel, who waited in silence. And it happened that the woman looked at Atzel and said,
You were my husband's right hand for years, and now after his death, you have been like an angel of God who takes care of me in his absence. Therefore, I would like you to tell Kadmiel about the importance of working in the fields as experience for his vocation as an apprentice.
Atzel stared at Kadmiel and said,
If you want to be an apprentice, you must persuade yourself that growth is the most important thing to keep your dreams alive. For this to happen, direct your steps to where the demands are very high. Only then will you have to read more, train more, and fail more to overcome the obstacles that come your way. Don't decrease the size of your dreams, but increase the size of your skills.
This means that through my stay in this camp, I will sharpen my skills and grow to the stature necessary to pursue my vocation.
If we were to talk about character and mastery over your emotions, in this field you will have your best teachers, Yitzhak and Kinor.
Yitzhak and Kinor?
The young man interrupted, completely flabbergasted.
That's right. If you help them to build their dreams, you will be confirming your vocation. Isn't the soul of your vocation service to others? Through your relationship with them, you will allow the great exchange to take place. For there is no one perfect in the land of the living. There are only imperfect human beings capable of forming one another.
But how can they form me, if they only aggravate me with their words?
The great exchange will happen if you take the time to understand them. If you do it well, as you persuade them of their dreams, they will be the iron that sharpens your character. You see, in every relationship, a true learner will build others up, to be built up himself. Whatever you build for others, you will end up building yourself. You have already identified the leaders in the field. Persuade them with wisdom, and all the members of the camp will follow in their footsteps.
It is a great challenge that lies ahead of me. No doubt Yitzhak and Kinor are the biggest obstacles standing between me and my goal.
The obstacles will be invincible giants if you take your eyes off the promise of God.
Atzel replied. Malka looked to Atzel and was amazed at the expression the old man's gaze transcribed as he spoke to the young man. She had never seen such an expression before during the time of her stewardship. As everyone was silent, there was only the sound of the wind rustling against the columns of the hut they were in. Finally, Malka broke the solemnity and spoke.
My dear Atzel, every man is a story to be told so that his legacy will not be forgotten. Will you give us the honor of hearing your story?
The old man sighed and, closing his eyes, began to speak.
Long ago, when my condition was that of a lowly picker in my father's field in the land of Petra, I had to make the most important decision of my life, to go as a slave in exchange for the welfare of my family. For the famine was great in that land because of the drought. And so it happened that when we had used up all the provisions we had for subsistence, my parents decided to sell everything to buy a little food for us. One day, when there was no more hope for our family, many caravans came from Taposiris. They were looking for slaves. Then, seeing that the land was barren and that my father had no trade or profession that would allow him to earn money as before, I decided that being a young man full of strength and vigor, I should go as a slave in exchange for the safety of my family. For with the price those travelers paid for a slave of my age, my family could have a better future. My parents wept bitterly, seeing that this was our only way out. However, they could not resist the evil that afflicted us. It was I who had to pay the price. I experienced firsthand the great exchange proclaimed by the inscriptions on the leather tube in your possession. Once the transaction was completed, I left without delay for distant lands. The days that followed were bitter. I searched for strategies to escape and return home, but found none. Little by little, we moved deeper and deeper into the desert until those days of misery and hard work choked my hope. Days and months went by until in my agony I felt that my chance to live was lost. I had made a decision whose repentance was irreversible, and to my mind there was no hope for me. At that moment, my suffering led me to think that the days of freedom had become a dream as distant to me as the East was from the West. However, in spite of all my suffering in those days, one day my whole existence had a sudden change of course. For after crossing the desert and traveling through unknown places, we finally arrived at Taposiris. And it so happened that the caravan leaders decided to establish our camping place in that territory. That same night, while we were all resting, a multitude of marauders from Axum camped near our camp and attacked us. At that moment, terror and consternation hung in the air. For many warriors dressed in white, with a red ornament on their sleeves and their faces covered, brandished their weapons until everyone in the camp was destroyed with the edge of the sword. Men, young and old, were destroyed without contemplation. Only we slaves were left alive. That day, I was fortunate enough to be saved from my slavery by a respected archer named Eliyahu. The man insisted that I stay with him to teach me his archery skills and become a mighty warrior. At that moment, I realized that if I had not lost my freedom for the sake of my family, I would never have found its true meaning when I regained it again, just when I had given up hope. In my existence, the sentence was fulfilled that says that one must lose one's life for a great cause to truly find it. What was for me a curse suddenly became a blessing. Since I no longer had any family or funds to find her, I accepted his invitation and became an archer in the army that Eliyahu led. During the time I was trained by my master, I learned that just as the archer with his skill decides the course that each of his arrows will take, so too for life or death, we children of God make but one decision, but the course of our life is in the hands of our Maker. The years that followed were full of splendor, for by the hand of Eliyahu, we dedicated ourselves to freeing slaves from those who oppressed them.
Now I understand. When my fathers and I were also subject to slavery, the days of our servitude being few, Eliyahu's army freed us from the hands of our oppressors.
Yes, Eliyahu was willing to risk his life to set the oppressed free. So it was that he too proved the adage of which I spoke a moment ago. In giving himself completely to his vocation, he found you as a token of God's favor.
Malka hid her face for a moment and wept lovingly. After a brief pause, the old man continued.
After he had found the good of God, Eliyahu withdrew from the heat of battle to devote himself entirely to his wife and to raise a family. And as far as I was concerned, as a token of my gratitude, I offered to support him in his new life, returning to the fields. And so it was that in our search for a peaceful place to settle, we came to Sagnit. Later, when this great man had served his time in the land of the living and was being called into the presence of his God, like a father entrusting his house to his eldest son, on his deathbed he sent for me and made a demand upon me. He was to take care of his wife and of his estate until I considered that I had fulfilled his charge. Then, with a haggard face but sighing with relief at hearing from my lips the oath he required, before he departed he said to me, "Though your father, your mother, and I leave you, yet the Most High will take you in and take care of you." That same day, the one who had been my mentor and like a father to me was reunited with his parents. "Now, my son, since you have made up your mind to give yourself boldly to your vocation, remember that you have done your due as a living being. Therefore, from now on, you must hold fast to your goal, remembering the promise you have received from God, paying no attention to the details of the way to get there, for they are not your concern, nor are they dependent upon you. Then, when the time comes, you must know that God, like the archer, will draw his bow very tight, and you will think that something bad has happened. Do not be surprised as if some strange thing were happening to you. Only remember God's promise, for you will be close to being launched so that you will rise to reach your goal.
Having said this, the old man stood up and in farewell said,
Tomorrow don't forget to put on the garment that your vocation requires, service.
So I will,
said the young man as the old man walked away. Then Malka also stood up, and as she walked away, she said to Kadmiel,
Quietly to observe, listen attentively without disqualification, lavishly give appreciation and praise to others, speak without offense, regarding yourself as inexperienced and ignorant in many matters. These are the 4 inscriptions which you must have written on the tablet of your heart to succeed as a leader in this field.
To be continued.